Well, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us this afternoon right before work's about to end. Appreciate your time and your attention. My name is W.J. Rossi, and I'm with Koss Olinger Financial Group, and I have with me Tim Rourke, who's going to be chiming in and probably heckling. So feel free to do the same. We're going to break this up into two separate sessions, each about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on questions and answers. The first one is going to be on education funding, and there was just a request from several people to get away from maybe the retirement planning and the types of retirement plans here, and could we talk about other issues related to financial planning. So the first one is going to be on education funding. The second one is going to be on a really exciting topic, life insurance. So stick around for this one. If the next one, if you want to stick around, great. If not, that's fine too. Just want to let you know there are two separate segments. And we have some slides up here, but this is by no means structured. The more interactive it is, the more fun it'll be. So feel free to chime in, ask questions. That's why we're here. Tim and I are here only at your request to be here as a resource for you. So if you have questions about education funding, great. If you have questions about life insurance, that's great. If you have questions about anything in general related to finance or investing or the retirement plans, feel free to chime in. If you have a personal question that you'd like to address afterwards, we'll stick around afterwards as well. If there's something that relates to your salary or how much you're saving and you don't want to share it with the group, that's fine. But if it is something you're comfortable sharing with the group, odds are if you have that question, you may have it as well. So the more interactive it can be, the better. Before we get started, any questions? Okay, super. Well, we have this broken down into really, there's probably several different ways that you can save for your children's or grandchildren's college. But there's really two primary differences that people ask us the most often. And those are 529 plans or college prepaid. Which is better, what's right, what's wrong, so on and so forth, pros and cons. So that's really what we're going to focus on, are those two main methods of saving for children's college. And I'll start out to say there is no right or wrong way. They're different. They really are just different. And depending on your personal situation will dictate on which one makes the most sense to you. There are people that do both. A lot of people do one or the other. There are some people that do both, and there's reasons why that may make sense. So again, chime in if you have any questions. We'll first off start talking about 529 plans and why they may make sense and how they work. A 529 plan is, by definition, Section 529 of the Internal Revenue Code. So that's where it gets its fancy name. It's just a section in the code of where the tax benefits are discussed and outlined. A 529 plan is a college savings vehicle specifically for secondary education, college, master's degree, doctorate, things like that. It's funded with after-tax money. You get no tax deduction, no tax benefit for contributing to it, at least in the state of Florida. In Birmingham, it might be different, and we'll talk about that in a moment too. In the state of Florida, there's no tax benefit for contributing to it. But it grows tax deferred. So if you put in $1,000 and it grows to $2,000 over a period of time, you're not paying tax each year as it grows. If it's withdrawn for qualified college educational expenses, it comes out tax-free. That's the benefit. Is your child's 1 year old, you put it in today, invest today and throughout, and it grows for 18 years, all that growth is tax-free then if it comes out tax-free for those qualified withdrawals. Qualified withdrawals, what are they? It's not just tuition. It is tuition, but it's also room, board, books, fees, computers, labs. Anything that the university or that financial institution requires you to have is a qualified expense. And there are examples and indexes within the 529 plan documents to say, you know, is room and board room, does that mean I can buy my kid a house and use their 529 to do it? No, it's not that. It's dormitory or dormitory equivalent, which I think is about $495 today per month. But there are set kind of ranges there. Books, you know, you can't go buy a library, but required books and lab fees and computers, things like that, there are set guidelines for qualified expenses. So it's not just tuition, it's for any part of college. And that goes back to why I said, you know, you might choose 529, you might choose college prepaid, you might choose to do both. Why would that be? If you want to buy a tuition-only plan with prepaid and then do a $529 for all the additional expenses, you can do that. Better be ready to save a lot of money, but you can do that. So again, there's no right or wrong. The $529 plan does have a lot of flexibility, though, because it pays for more than just tuition. What are some benefits? There is no set amount to put in. You can put in $25 a month. You can put in $1,000 a month. There's no one saying you have to put in this amount. It's more of what can you afford to put in. So there's a lot of flexibility. You can pick something today. I'll save this amount per month or per year, and then you can change that at any time. So there's a lot of flexibility on how much you're saving for your child's college. It's being invested. Kind of like your retirement plan, you can choose how aggressive or conservative you want to be. So there's market upside potential growth. You're controlling on how much risk you want to take and how much return you hope to achieve over time, but you're controlling those investments. So that's a benefit. If you have more than one child, it's in the oldest child's name and they get a scholarship or they don't go to school or whatever, it can transfer to a sibling. So it's flexible within the family. It can also go to cousins, things like that. So if one person doesn't use it or they use it but not all of it, it can go to someone else within the family. That's nice to know. The other nice thing is in Florida, we don't have a state income tax. Right? Everyone here knows that. We do not have a state income tax. So Florida has a 529 plan, but guess what? 42 or 3 other states have 529 plans for their state also. In Florida, you can pick which state's plan you want. You can pick Utah. You can pick Alaska. You can pick Nevada. You can pick Ohio. You can pick any of them, and that doesn't limit what state school you go to. That's just the state that sponsors it, and there's a variety of reasons of why you might want to choose one state versus another. You know, the investment options available in one state are better than another. Costs are lower in one state versus another. There's a lot of reasons why you want to look at all the different ones available and pick which one fits your needs. But it's nice we have that option. So if you want to go to a Florida school, it doesn't mean that you need Florida's 529 plan. That's very often an area of confusion. You can pick Alaska's plan or Utah's plan and go to school in Florida. It's just the state that's sponsoring it. Now, if you're in a state that has a state income tax, then you would want to use that state's plan because you would get a state income tax deduction. Does that make sense? You may not, because we don't have state income tax here, but there's a state like South Carolina, for example. South Carolina has a state income tax of 6.3%. If you use South Carolina's plan and you're a resident of South Carolina, you're going to get a state income tax deduction for the amount you contribute to it. So you wouldn't want to use any other states. You'd want to use South Carolina's. Ohio, same way. There's a lot of states with state income taxes. Most states do have a state income tax. But if they don't, like us, you can use any other state plan. Does Alabama have a state income tax? They do? Okay. So Alabama, you would want to use Alabama's, their 529 plan. Florida, you have flexibility. So be aware of that. Make sense to everybody so far? Yes?
Is there a maximum that we can contribute every year?
There is a maximum. It's not per year. It's a total aggregate of $120,000 in a 5-year period. Is that right? I think that's right. It's somewhere close to that. So there's a limit, but it's a pretty high limit. But if you can rally up parents, grandparents, friends, it's... I'll double check the math in a second, but it's pretty high. Yes, ma'am.
If you don't use the entire amount on your children while they're in school and you don't want to transfer to anyone else, whether you don't have any other children or what have you, the rest of the money will be taken out with fertility? Is that what will happen? Or
Exactly. There's a couple options I'll get into, but you have options. That's right. So if you don't use all the money for a child and you only have one child, what are your options? We'll talk about that. But so if I don't come back to that, yell at me. But I think I'll come back to that in a couple minutes. The other nice thing is it's not just Florida schools. I kind of already touched on that, but any qualified higher education institution is covered. And what does that mean? It's not just universities throughout the state or throughout the country. It is those, but it's also colleges. Santa Fe College. Any golfers in the room? The Tampa Academy of Golf, covered. You like to cook? Atlanta Culinary Institute, covered. There's a photography institute somewhere in Georgia, also covered. Any higher education, covered. So it's for all those. So there's added flexibility there. The question?
Yeah, what can this be used for? You said siblings, cousins, whatnot. What about like spouses or something?
Absolutely. Anyone in the family.
What about yourself?
Absolutely. That's one of the options I was going to get into. So I'll just go there because the questions are coming up. I was going to put it in one of the cons, which we can jump around. That's fine. You have, because generous relatives, you're saving a lot. You have $50,000 in your 529 plan for your one child. And they get a scholarship. How cool is that? And so now there's 50 grand sitting in there. You have a couple options. One is transfer it to like a cousin or something. One of your siblings that has a child, you can do that. Maybe you transfer it to them and they buy it from you, or maybe you just give it to them. You can do that. You can transfer it to another lineal family member. So one of your siblings, their children, that would work. If your spouse wants to go back to school, that could work. If you want to go back and get an MBA or doctorate degree, you can use it. So sibling, family member, spouse, yourself, you can all use that. What else can you do? Let it sit there and grow for a generation for your grandchild. What an awesome gift that is. If you can afford to leave it there, tax-free growth for a whole generation, that's powerful. So there's some legacy planning there that people, that's why there is a limit that's pretty high, but a really, really affluent, wealthy person might shelter a bunch of money and let it grow tax-free for a generation. So there is a limit. It's pretty high, but there's a limit. So you can let it grow for a generation. So that's an option. The last option is you can pull it out for non-qualified educations. What's going to happen then, this will be in the con section, you're going to pay income tax on all the earnings and also an additional 10% excise tax on the earnings. So basically, if you're in a 20% tax bracket plus a 10% penalty, you're going to get 70% of the earnings. Does that make sense? So you'll get some back, but there's some penalties there. But if they're qualified educational expenses, then it's tax-free growth and tax-free distributions, and that's the power of it. So if you have a 16-year-old child, is a 529 plan really exciting to you? Not really, because you only have a year or two of tax-free growth. So there's not that much opportunity, not that much benefit. Maybe you're better off leaving it in the bank so there's no market risk, things like that. So 529 plans aren't for everybody. The big benefit is having it in there for a long time and let it grow and grow and grow and grow so that you have that tax-free benefit. Yes?
If you have two kids, would you just suggest having just one plan that you can use for both of them? Or can we do two 529s in a family and then each have like a 15,000?
I would suggest, so the question was, in case you didn't hear it, if you have two children, do you do just one plan or do you do two plans? I would suggest a plan for each child, mainly because if they're within 4 years of age, then what do you do? If they're at school at the same time, you're only pulling out for one, so you'd want two. If the kids are 6 or 7 years apart, you could get away with one. Let the one use it, and if there's anything left, the second child could use it. But if they're going to be in school around the same time, or within potentially, if they're within 5 years, because sometimes now it takes 5 years to get through school, or more if there's master's or higher education than that. But I would have two separate plans. My children are Nicholas, Isabella, and Alexandra, and all three of them have their own because the three of them are only 3 years apart.
You can only pull out for one
At a time.
Oh, okay.
But then when one's done, you can change it. Because basically you're the account owner and the child is the beneficiary. Not the beneficiary in the sense of a retirement plan that if you die, but they're the benefactor of the money. So it's coming out in their name, and you can change that benefactor at any time. But if you change it from my Nicholas to my Isabella, now she's getting it, he can't. And you can't have two on there. So you would definitely, that's a good point, you would want 2 or 3, depending on how many children you have. No. If you have 10 kids, you can switch it 10 times. But you're limited by the number of family members. But it can go from one child to another, to the spouse, to you. There's no limit there. Other questions? This is good. You can switch it back. I've never seen that happen, but I have not seen anything saying you cannot do that. So a lot of benefits of the 529, right? A lot of flexibility, a lot of control. Use it for a lot of different reasons. What are some of the drawbacks? Well, what happens? It's invested in the stock market, right? What happens if the stock market goes down? Your college savings are going down too. So you want to invest it to some comfort level where you know what the time horizon is for when the child's going to be in school and you need the money, and what kind of risk you're taking. So it doesn't have to be in the stock market. It can be in the bond market too. You can balance that risk, but there is risk. So just be aware of that. Did you contribute enough? How do you know exactly what tuition, if you have a newborn today, how do you know what tuition is going to be 18 years from now? And how do you know that you're putting enough in there? There's no guarantee that you're going to have enough money in it. That's a risk, right? That's a drawback. You may have too much money in it. And then what happens? Then you got to transfer it to someone else or pull it out and pay penalties. So it's really hard to gauge on how much is the right amount to be contributing. You don't want to have 20,000 in there and you needed 50. You know, I mean, that's better than nothing, but you didn't get there. You don't want 50 in there if you only need 20, because then there's all the excess and potential penalties. So you really need to kind of gauge how much you should be doing and keep a close eye on what tuition is currently and what you're putting in and what the market performance is. So there's more monitoring that's needed there. It's more actively managed, if you will. Penalties on excess contributions. We talked about what happens if there's too much in there. But there's the 10% excise tax on there. So those are the biggest risks, and hence the cons are there's no guarantee that you're going to have enough to pay for college. You may have more than you need and pay penalties. And there's market risk there because the market, it could go up, but it could go down, and it could go down at a bad time. So you want to try and manage that. Excuse me. One of the things that we advocate if you're going to do it is similar to how many people have sat in on one of the retirement planning sessions? Anybody? Hopefully. Well, yeah, you have to. Good. So in Fidelity, there's those target date funds for retirement. You know, you might retire in 2040, so you pick a 2040 fund. And, you know, right now it's aggressive because you're farther away. But each year that you get closer to retirement, it gets more and more conservative, right? So that when you're in retirement, it's pretty safe and conservative. There are what's called age-based or enrollment-based 529 plan options, investment options, where if the child's 1 year old, it's mostly stocks. It's aggressive. It's going to try and grow. But as the child gets closer and closer to the enrollment in college, it gets more and more conservative. And so that's something that makes a lot of sense, is take some risk when the time horizon's long, and as you get closer and closer to college, you get more and more conservative. So when you're in college, it's almost all in cash and bonds, so it's safe to reduce that risk of market loss. But there is no guarantee, so just be careful of that. Does that make sense? So time horizon dictates how much risk you're going to take. So pros, cons, that's a 529 plan in a nutshell. Any questions? Yes?
In the past, these plans haven't done so well. Some states, actually, the plans have gone bankrupt, and some of them have put like freezes on them. So what's to say that something like that couldn't happen? I know that it's based on the economy, and, the market and all of that. How can we protect ourselves and our investment, if we know that this could happen?
So I'm just going to repeat the question for the benefit of people who may not heard or that are on the call or for the camera. Historically, maybe these plans haven't done as well, or if a state has gone bankrupt, or it's not working out well, what can you do to protect yourself for these it's not even for you, it's for your children or grandchildren's college. You obviously want to be good stewards of their money. What can you do to protect that? If a state goes bankrupt, so this plan, if it's a Florida plan or a Utah plan or an Ohio plan or Alaska plan or Nevada plan or California plan, the California may go bankrupt, who knows. All they are the sponsor of the plan. The money in it is your money. It's segregated. It's not part of the state's assets. It's different than like a prepaid plan. Florida prepaid or other state prepaid plans, that's part of the state's balance sheet. This is not. This is your money, and it's separate. So if you had a California plan and California declares bankruptcy next week, your money's still there. So you should be protected from that element. Now, bad performance, that's a risk. That's one of the cons. If you choose something very aggressive and the market goes, 2008, your child's born, and you invest $1,000 in the 529 plan, and the stock market and the economy that year goes down 40%, you just lost 40%. There's a risk there. So maybe you don't want to be that aggressive with your children's college money, and you can control how much is in the stock market versus bond market, and based on your comfort level with risk and your return expectations, balance with asset allocation, so you can mitigate some of the market downturn and bad performance. If you look at 529 plan returns, they can be as good as anything else that you invest in because you have a lot of control. Most states offer several different risk or investment options. So you can be very conservative and be in bonds and stay out of the stock market, earn historically lower returns, but have that option so it's safe. Or you can be more opportunistic and be more equity or stock based. And in the last 3 years, that's done really well. So it's timing and market risk is a part of, you just need to balance that out.
So when they say that the plan is frozen,
That they're
that you cannot access that money.
correct.
Means that they're not allowing you to enroll.
Add more. Maybe you can't, depending on the state. I've not heard that for 529 plans, that it's frozen. Could be. I've not heard that, though. But if,
I had looked in the Georgia plan.
okay.
They were telling me that it was frozen. They weren't allowing anybody to.
Was that the Georgia prepaid plan, though? Or
It was actually that prepaid, but they were also talking about this.
okay. I haven't been that familiar with. I have not heard that, but it could be. It sounds more like it would be the prepaid versus 529, because the 529, again, it's a segregated asset that's yours. Your name's on it. You know, it's yours. So that if you're concerned about a state's financial strength, I would look at a 529 versus a prepaid type thing, because they may freeze that. The 529, I don't think they would freeze because it's not impacting them financially, because they're not at risk. We'll get into that in a minute. I'm getting ahead a little bit, but prepaid, the state's at risk, right? Because you're paying into the plan, and they're guaranteeing tuition. So if tuition skyrockets, like University of Florida's gone up 15% the last 3 years in a row, market hasn't done that. So the state's on the hook for that differential. So they are financially impacted by it. 529, there's no guarantees that you'll have enough. You're bearing that you have more control with the 529, but you are bearing the risk of, is that enough to cover tuition? Florida prepaid is different, or other states prepaid. They're on the hook for that guarantee. You give up control, but now they're on the hook for the guarantee, so it's different. Does that make sense? It's almost the opposite. So let's talk about prepaid college plans. I'm mainly talking about Florida because we're here, but it could be Georgia or any other state prepaid plan. The difference there is it guarantees the cost of college. So you're not going to have not enough or too much. They're guaranteeing that if you put in what they tell you today, they're guaranteeing it. No matter what the market does or the economy, assuming the state is solvent, to your point, if the state is solvent, they're going to pay and make good on that promise. If you pay us this much, we're going to guarantee your kid goes to college. Okay? So that's a huge benefit. You can also, I said just tuition, there's also a dorm plan also. Most people don't do that. It's not very popular anymore. But it guarantees to cover those costs of either tuition and or dorms. Some states have even like activity fees that you can add into as well. But it guarantees to cover the cost of that. That's a huge benefit. You don't have to worry about market risk. You're not bearing that risk if you do what they say and pay in what they tell you. So there's not much flexibility, but it guarantees it. That's a big value. You can do a 4-year plan. You can do a 2-year college plan instead of a 4-year university plan. You can add dorm in. There's some variety there. It too can be transferred. If one child doesn't use it because they don't go to college or attend some higher education school, or they get a scholarship, athletic, academic, what have you, if they don't need it, a sibling can utilize it. So there's a little bit of flexibility there. It was that Florida prepaid was just for the 9 universities in the state university system. In recent past, there have been some states that offer reciprocity. State of Georgia does. If you have Florida prepaid and you want to go to UGA, you can. And they will accept the Florida prepaid dollars and apply it to the state school of Georgia. That's good because it used to not have that flexibility. And Georgia does the same for Florida. What's the downside of that, though? You're paying out-of-state tuition. So your in-state prepaid is not going to cover near the cost because out-of-state tuition is about double. So you can use the dollars, and that's good. You didn't lose them, but it's probably not going to be enough because it's out-of-state tuition. But there is increased flexibility that used to, a couple years ago, I think 5-6 years ago, that was not an option. So they're making it more flexible, but it's still not enough because of the out-of-state. But there is that flexibility, and that's nice because that was not the case too long ago. So not every state has that reciprocity, but more and more in the Southeast are starting to. And I know Georgia and Florida do have that reciprocity. I think Alabama does too. So that's good. They're getting more and more flexible. What are some drawbacks? They're telling you how much it's going to take to guarantee it, and you may not have enough to do it. You know, your dollar can only get stretched so far. So if they say it's going to be $300 a month and all you can save is $100 a month, it's not an option for you. So it is fairly expensive because you're paying for that guarantee. We already touched on this. It loses value if you go outside of Florida. Yes? This is paid for after tax. Similar to the 529 plan, excuse me, thank you, that's a good point. There is no tax benefit for doing prepaid today. The tax benefit, though, is if you put in $25,000 and tuition when your child goes to school is $50,000, you're not paying tax on the differential. So it's more of a tax benefit later type of thing. Similar, very different, similar tax attributes to a Roth versus a traditional. A traditional gives you tax benefits IRA. A Roth IRA, it's not the same. I don't want to compare it, except that it's going in with after-tax dollars and coming out tax-free for qualified expenses. So prepaid, same way. So if there's flexibility to go to Georgia or Alabama schools, state schools, but you're going to be paying out-of-state tuition, so it devalues it a little bit. If your child gets a scholarship and can't transfer it anywhere else, what happens to the money? You get it back. No penalties, but guess what? No interest either. What do we say about the 529 plan? If you put in money and it grew because it was in the market, you would have to pay taxes and penalties, right? But you still got about 70%, maybe 65% of the earnings back. So you got there were some penalties, but you got earnings back. This, all you do is get your principal back. If you put money in 18 years ago and today your child decides, your only child, I'm not going to school, I'm going to start my own business, good for you. But the money you put in 18 years ago, you're going to get it back. So there's an opportunity cost that was lost, opportunity lost of all the potential earnings that it had. So that's kind of a downside. Make sense so far? So let's say you decide that I want to do one or the other. 529 plan, age-based allocation, we talked about that, enrollment-based. Alaska is a plan that I've mentioned a couple times. I like Alaska. We use Alaska sometimes for a couple things. It's not just one mutual fund company sponsoring it. It's a multi-manager approach. Also, the state of Alaska is free from the claims of creditors, the 529 plan. So that, I mean, hopefully no one in here gets sued. But if you do get sued or go bankrupt, Alaska's 529 plan is free from the claims of creditors. So that's a little added benefit. If you want to look and analyze costs of different states because you live in Florida, if you live in Alabama and there is a state income tax, you use Alabama's 529 plan. If you live in Florida and you want to go to savingforcollege.com, there's a college cost calculator comparison so you can see where Ohio's plan is more expensive than South Carolina's plan, that Florida's plan and Alaska's plan and all the different plans out there, and look at returns and costs. Savingforcollege.com is a great resource. It's free. And it's a great way to analyze all the different plans available. We looked at University of Florida just because we're here in Gainesville. For those of you that are in Alabama or Georgia, forgive us, you probably don't even like Gators. At UF, though, tuition and fees right now, $6,100 per year. You would need to save $133 per month to do it. And that would get you. Does that guarantee it? No. We already talked about 529 plans don't guarantee. You may invest really well and have way more than you need. Investments may not do as well, and tuition keeps escalating rapidly, and you may not have enough. But you can control. You can say, well, I don't have 133, but my kid can pay for some of it, and I'll just do 75 a month, and that's something. And you have that flexibility, but it does not guarantee anything. Prepaid. There's an enrollment window from October 15th to January 15th through January 23rd. I don't know why those dates are the way they are, but that's what it is. Four-year university right now, $53,000 one time. If you have that and can write the check. You can also do like a 6-year payment plan, and that's a little less, or you can do per month, and it's $279 per month until your kid gets into school. So your child's born today, and you want to do the Florida prepaid, you have an option. You can write a check for $53,000. You can pay like $500 a month for 60 months or 55 months, or you can do $249 a month and guarantee them tuition. Guarantees them tuition. But if you only have $100 a month to do, prepaid's not an option. That's why in the slide it said it's expensive. But what you're getting for it is that guarantee, and there's a huge value there. So it's a matter of what your priorities are. Florida prepaid, or Georgia prepaid, or Alabama prepaid, it guarantees tuition, but there's a price for that. Versus if you just want to save something for your child, 529 offers a little more flexibility. So there's differences. We all see that. The point is not to advocate one is better than the other. I hope you're not getting that out of it. It's that they're different, and there's pros and cons to both. Depends what is most applicable to you and what's important to you and your goals. So there's not one right or wrong. Yes?
With Maria's question earlier about the 529, you said that's a separate asset. It's not tied to the state's balance sheet.
Correct.
Are the prepaids tied to the state's balance sheet?
It kind of is directly impacted, yes, because I'm just going to use University of Florida, forgive me, but University of Florida is a part of the state university system, and the tuitions, the increases in the cost of college, the legislator mandates what that is, right? So when you hear about, if you follow the news and the media, Bernie Manchin wants to raise tuition, right, to generate more revenue for the university. The state kind of barks at that for two reasons. One, that means Bright Futures gets more expensive for the state, and prepaid gets more expensive for the state because they're on the hook. If someone did prepaid a year ago, and and the state ran projections of the historical average of tuition going up is about 6.5%, and so they run that for the next 18 years, and you fund it at one time, so now you're guaranteed, and all of a sudden Governor Scott says, okay, UF, go ahead and raise it 15%. The state's coming out of pocket for that, right? So the state is directly impacted by this. So if the state can mandate and somehow keep tuition rising lower, the cost rising lower, then they're not on the hook for as much. If tuition goes up a lot more, they're on the hook, and potentially maybe they can't fulfill their obligations. So that may be why some states freeze and say, we can't afford to do this anymore. Florida hasn't done that. But there's potential where a state could freeze the prepaid plan because they just can't afford to do it. Because that is an obligation of the state to pay that.
What would happen to people who are, you suddenly find yourself paying for 18 years and then get to the point where you need it and you say, sorry, you have the money?
Probably not. I can't control the government. But probably the reason they freeze it is because they say, we see the obligations on the books right now. We'll fulfill those, but we can't fulfill any new ones. So kind of the grandfathered in type of thing is what I would expect. Again, I can't speak for the government, nor would I try to hope to understand why they do or what they do. But typically they would freeze it because they realize, uh-oh, our obligations are getting too high. We can't afford to take on any more, so we'll freeze it so that we can pay the ones that we promised would. And Florida's prepaid system is pretty solvent. They send out an annual report. It's public. They're in pretty good shape. I can't speak to Georgia and Alabama. I apologize. I haven't done a lot of research on those, but Florida's is very solvent. You can feel safe and comfortable that if you put money in the prepaid program, that it'll be there for your child's future. Absolutely. You can feel very confident, very comfortable with that. Other questions about saving for college? The other option that we don't really talk about, there's benefits, as you can see. There's guarantees, there's tax benefits. The other thing you could do is open up a bank account and stick money in for your child's college and just put it in a side fund. There's nothing wrong with that either. Then there's no strings attached, no taxes if you don't use it for that. There's no tax benefits to doing that, but then there's no strings attached. Just open up an account that's earmarked for your child's college. That's an option. Yes?
Any restrictions in both?
No, a lot of people do both.
Because I'm currently enrolled in the Florida prepaid, although apparently I got in good and only pay $100 a month.
It's gone way up in the last couple of years.
Apparently. So if I just wanted to supplement, because I didn't do the dorm plan.
Right. You just did tuition only. Right? That's what most people just do, tuition only. And so if you want to do a little extra for books and fees and room and board, absolutely. The cost of college, tuition is correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, I think the percentage, tuition is about 40 to 50% of the overall cost of college. Isn't that about right? It may be less because food, dorms, or place to stay, rent, whatever, books, all that is as much or more than just tuition. So it's a very good point to do both. If you can afford to do both, I can give you some personal experience too about, so if you couldn't hear it or on TV or internet or call in, someone mentioned they got in at the right time because they paid less than they do now. My firstborn child in 2006, I looked at it, prepaid was about $13,000 one-time lump sum. $13,000 in 2006. In 2008, it was about $22,000 one-time lump sum. Now you can see in 2013 it was $53,000, and that's because the cost of college keeps going up so much. So yeah, 6-7 years ago it wasn't nearly as expensive, but the cost of tuition has gone up so much that they keep raising the price. And that sounds bad, but you can rest assured and feel good that it's solvent because they're charging accordingly. So you don't have to worry about putting money in and 18 years later it not being there. They're bringing in the dollars. They're doing that for a reason. It's not to be profitable. It's the state. It's so that they can cover the escalating and rising costs of tuition.
So, in that rebate, when can you take it? When can you decide to put that money? You use the example earlier, like, okay, my child decided they didn't want to go to school. Is the rebate, are you signing that to a child when you purchase the plan?
The prepaid? Yeah, there's a child's Social Security attached to it.
And so I am able to do that when they become college age, or when can you actually say, hey, yeah, I'm not going to use this money for college?
You are going to use it or you're not going to use it?
I'm not going to.
Yeah, as soon as, whenever you want. I mean, you could, if you wrote a check for $53,000 today, and 3 years from now, for whatever reason, you're not going to, you need it, you can go get that money. But it'll only be that. It won't be any more than that. But if it's 18 years from now, or they get a scholarship and you want to leave it in there just in case if there's another child or a cousin or sibling or something, you can leave it in there. And you can transfer it for up to, what, 10 years? Is that what it is? So if there's within a 10-year age differential, you can leave it in there in case another family member needs it. Yes?
If you have a 529 plan, can you use it for stuff like JYA programs and similar things, the junior year abroad, you know, where you have airfare involved, all that kind of stuff? Can you pay for those?
That, I am not sure. I'm going to say maybe not. And we can follow up afterwards and check. If it's a required expense, it is covered. If they require you to have a computer or lab fees or you know, you're an engineer and you need certain things or whatever, then it's covered. That's pretty black and white. Things like that that are kind of optional, like travel abroad or something like that, if it's not required, it may not be covered. We can check on that.
What about high school students who qualify for college programs when they're still in high school? And so they take, let's say, summer program, dues, math or something. Does it cover those kinds of costs?
If it's a college expense, it'll be covered. Yeah. That's an ancillary question to that. If someone's in a private high school, does that count? No. Secondary education. So if they're getting college credit for it, then it would count. If it's just an extracurricular for high school to go check it out or to get some brownie points or get some AP credits or something like that, not going to count. If they're getting college credit for it, though, it counts. So that's the biggest difference. Yes?
Four-year plan for your child, and then they end up getting a scholarship, can you apply that plan to like graduate studies, or is it limited to the 4-year undergrad?
4-year undergrad.
So you can use it for another child's 4-year.
Yes. Well, because it also depends on where they go to school. You know, if they stay here and go for it, it wouldn't work because getting a master's, those per credit hours are a lot more, and PhDs are even more. So it's just for 4-year undergrad. But the 529 is very flexible in that it can be any post-secondary higher education. Well, thank you very much for your attention and questions. If you think of anything else or have a personal question, emails are up here. And hopefully if you're online, you can see the slides. Email, phone number, feel free to call us. Happy to help you with anything.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And in about 1 minute, we'll start the next segment on life insurance. I know that's a really exciting subject, but